Hey, Tourmaline, thank you so much for being here today with me. Just a quick introduction. Tourmaline is an award-winning artist, filmmaker, writer, and activist based in Miami. Known for her dedication to Black trans joy and freedom, she co-curated Happy Birthday, Marsha, and directed films about figures like Miss Major, a Guggenheim Fellow and Time 100 honoree. Her work has been featured in Vogue, the New York Times, and on ABC News. Her art is housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tate, and Getty Museum. Tourmaline has also directed pride campaigns for Dove, Marc Jacobs, and Reebok, and worked with organizations like Queers for Economic Justice and the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. In addition to her film and artistic work, Tourmaline is a prominent advocate for transgender rights and visibility. Her contributions to transcultural production include co-editing the new museum anthology on trans art, published by MIT Press in 2017. As a passionate activist, she has been a key figure in amplifying the voices of marginalized communities, particularly Black trans individuals, through her creative projects and activism. Tourmaline continues to inspire a new generation of leaders and advocates and committed to justice, equality, and liberation for all. Great, Tourmaline. Thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It really means a lot.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dig into more about the book that you wrote, Marsha, and
Yeah.
how did your connection to Marsha P. Johnson influence the book?
Yeah. So the book is called Marsha, the, let's see if we can get it. Yes, Marsha, The Joy and Defiance of Marsha P. Johnson. And it's the first biography, definitive biography of Marsha. And it was really a 20-year project of, like learning about Marsha at first as a young person, in my early 20s, and then getting close with the people who she mothered and nurtured, and her loved ones, like her nephew Al Michaels and her sister Jeannie Michaels and her brother Bob. And then like diving deep into watching her performances. She was an artist herself, and she did two performances a day with the off Broadway group, the Hot Peaches, and um, Angels of Light, who really created these iconic looks we still see today, and through drag stars. And Marsha simultaneously, was a performer, artist, but also an activist organizer. So she was, fighting for childcare, free childcare alongside free gender affirming care. She really knew that her freedom was inextricably linked to the freedom of other people. So she had this passionate, wide vision of what freedom felt like and looked like. And also, she wasn't going to turn down the volume of her life. She knew that she got to be the fabulous being, the glamourful being that she was in any given moment.
That's amazing. Wow. It's important, I think, to share also to these untold stories of Black trans icons like Marsha. And I wanted to also kind of ask you about maybe a surprising or lesser known part of Marsha P. Johnson's life that you perhaps wanted readers to know more about.
Yeah, so just like Marsha, started this group Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries after the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, and they were fighting for the rights of other trans people, especially trans people of color who were doing sex work, and they were organizing and showing up at rallies for the Black Panther parties or the Young Lords. And they were also like having a house for each other because they were not just fighting against, but they were thinking about, well, what are we defending? What are we fighting for? The space to be free, right? The space to nourish ourselves, to turn up the volume and the looks of ourselves. And she was a deeply spiritual person. She was lighting her candles in her home to St. Barbara and to St. Lucy. And so much of the care work and the activism and the performance work was really grounded in a sense of spirituality and faith. And so that was an important thing to really just learn and revel in. And also, like, she was just such a committed performer. She moved to New York City when she was 18 in 1963 and hit Times Square, in part because Times Square at the time was like where you went if you wanted to be a star, right? And so she was performing outside theaters of Times Square, and that's where she met a 13-year-old Sylvia Rivera and young people that she started to mother and mentor. And, so much of Marsha is known in New York, but she also, she performed in London with the Hot Peaches, and she had this whole life in Los Angeles where she was just getting her life. And so Marsha was just a fully dimensional person.
Yeah, it seems like she was very committed to activism, like you said,
Yeah.
especially her work with the street transvestite action revolutionaries.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's like very important to also kind of linger upon how solidarity can also really kind of establish a common sort of idea of liberation and challenge
Yeah.
these systemic kind of oppressive systems that we live under to this day. And I wonder,
Exactly right.
how do you hope that Marsha will inspire future generations, especially within the LGBTQIA plus community?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's so important that future and current generations know that Marcia was navigating, just like today, we're navigating some challenging, harsh conditions. Marcia was too. When she was, in New York City, when she got there, New York City had a law, like a literal law, that if you were a trans or gender nonconforming person and you weren't wearing three articles of clothes associated with the gender you were assigned at birth, the New York Police Department could arrest you and put you in jail. So she was navigating, like constant harassment by the police every day. And she knew her life was largely illegal in the eyes of the state. And yet she was determined to make a way out of no way. She was determined to live largely. And part of that was at the time in 1963, she rented these little hourly hotel rooms and she gathered her sisters, like a 13-year-old Sylvia Rivera, and they used that place as a space to dream. They started to ask each other in these hourly hotels, they called them hot spring hotels because whether it was winter, spring, summer, or fall, the rooms were hot, there was no air conditioning, you couldn't crack a window, but they were providing a little bit of sanctuary, a little bit of relief from the violence on the streets. And in those spaces, she and young people were dreaming up the world that they deserved. They looked at the harsh conditions not as the forevermore reality, but as a launching pad, as a springboard to dream beyond them and to usher in a world that little by little they could make true. And they couldn't do it all at once. In 1963 they were dreaming in the hotels. In 1969 they were fighting back against the police. That's why we have Pride, right? It was the Stonewall uprising that created why we celebrate Pride every June. In 1971, she was doing it with her friends in the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. In the early days of the HIV/AIDS crisis, she was doing it through care work, and throughout her life, she was performing and being glamorous. I think it's really important for young people to see that model of we don't have to be small because other people want us to be. We could not let the law or the Supreme Court or other people determine how we feel about ourselves. We get to dream beyond the current reality into what we know we deserve.
Yeah, and it's very important, like you're saying, to understand that she laid the groundwork. It seems that she was like the blueprint for future
It
activists,
was the blueprint. Yeah.
for particularly like marginalized communities, and
Yeah.
so encourage to challenge injustice, I'm sorry, and celebrate her identity without fear and that of others. And I want to know,
Exactly.
also too, I want to know because about your filmmaking work and your acting,
Yeah.
and how has that influenced how you tell stories about Black trans individuals?
Yeah, so I started filmmaking that kind of work in 2007, right? I was in my young 20s and I was in this group called the Welfare Warriors. We were part of Queers for Economic Justice, and we wanted to, we were working around welfare issues and how, for us who were in the LGBTQIA plus community, we couldn't go into a welfare office without a welfare worker being like, no, come back when you look like a man, or no, come back when you look like a woman. And so we knew that these places were inhospitable, right? And also they weren't giving us enough to survive. And that was a welfare was an issue that Marsha was organizing around. And so we said, okay, we're going to keep our campaign up. We're going to, push back against this, but we're also going to take a second and document our lives. And we started a 3-year project led by my friend Kagendo Marungi, who was a brilliant filmmaker, and we just started, creating this film. It was called Taking Freedom Home. It's online. It's from 2007 to 2010, and it just shows the fabulousness of who we are. We were a group of either currently low income or formerly low income, queer, transgender, non-conforming people, and we're talking about, getting welfare, going to the shelter system, getting on the subway, our big dreams, going on a trip, and it became so enlivening. I could really feel my full body saying yes to doing that kind of art. And so after that, I was like, I want to make a film. I was learning about Marsha. I want to make a film about Marsha P. Johnson, And so that's when I, started off setting my dreams of. I didn't grow up in a filmmaking household. I didn't know a single filmmaker besides Kagenda, and we were filmmaking by, like, this is before iPhones or camera phones, passing around a little camera to each other. Like that was our filmmaking, right? And so it just felt like the furthest thing in the world to, like, make a real movie, even though we were really making movies. And so I just set about trying to learn how to do that. And I made friends with people who were making really beautiful films. And one of those was Sacha Wartzel. And together we co-wrote, directed, and produced Happy Birthday, Marsha, and our friend Arthur Jassa, who was a cinematographer for Daughters of the Dust and so many other beautiful films, said, "Hey, I wanna work with y'all. I wanna be your cinematographer." And it was a many-year project, and we shot over many years. And in between, I worked for this incredible filmmaker, Dee Reese, who was the director and writer of Pariah and Bessie with Queen Latifah. And I worked on a film. I was Dee's assistant on this film called Mudbound, starring Mary J. Blige and Carey Mulligan. And that was really my film school, being on set every day, being Dee's assistant, and learning the ins and outs of, like, how you make a film. And then coming out of that being like, we're going to finish Happy Birthday, Marsha. And so much of, like, art that made by people on the outsides of, whatever kind of industry or art world or film world happens over. It's a durational project, and that's just right. It's really beautiful to take your time with something and do it the way that you can. And so that inspired a bigger desire around filmmaking, and that's kind of the origins of that practice.
Nice. That's
Mm.
wonderful. It seems like a lot of the filmmaking or the films that you created center around lived experiences of Black trans people as a way
Yeah,
to kind of talk about these social change and the role of art and activism. And
yeah,
wonderful. I really love that. I need to go ahead and take a look at that film that you suggested
yeah, yeah.
on YouTube. But I also want to know, how can the community step forward, and how can society better kind of create more of an inclusive future for Black trans communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a moment where we're seeing the harshness of the conditions, just like Marsha did, right? It's undeniable. The Supreme Court just last week had a ruling about, against the bodily autonomy of young people accessing necessary and urgent medical health care in Tennessee. I was a lead organizer in New York State for fighting New York about a similar law. So basically, up until 2014, New York State had a provision under Medicaid that specifically denied transgender nonconforming people access to healthcare. And we had many, many years of campaigning to change that. And the thing that I take away from that is, like, we were successful, right? Like, that provision in New York State doesn't exist anymore. This was, over a decade ago. But the thing that I take away from that is, like, just like Marsha changed the world, and just like this was changed, like, we can continue to change the world. It's so important that we remember that the world that we're born into isn't fixed. Things are malleable. It's so important to dream these big dreams about living in a world that has a greater sense of freedom, has more of what we deserve, and then move in the direction of that. Listen to the people who are organizing already around that. I think constantly of the Trans Justice Funding Project that works nationwide, especially with low income and rural and people of color groups, like that's really important, right? People who are not, like have big platforms already, like small acts of care consistently really matter in this moment.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Like these small pockets of hope
Yeah.
or also through through kind of raising awareness, like you're saying,
Yes.
discrimination or violence against trans people, particularly Black trans women. But I also want to know
Mhm.
what inspired you to turn Marsha P. Johnson's story into a picture book with One Day in June.
Yeah, one day in June to me, I just have so much joy when I think about it, in part because it's really about, you know, tuning our tuner to the, as artists, I feel like sometimes we can feel like we're in the flow of our creativity, right? Like we're really like able to channel something or imagine something before it exists and then create it. To me, One Day in June is about tuning our tuner to the full aliveness of Marsha P. Johnson as she exists today, right? Getting in the flow of Marsha's magic. And so it starts off at the beach, at a queer beach, and then it leads to, the evidence of Marsha's joy as young people are trying on taking risks with fashion or wanting to show up for their community at a rally or sharing their money or their tips. Like to me, it's really just about the fullness of who we are and not being apologetic for that, but actually knowing it's a really good thing. It benefits all of us.
Yeah, definitely. Like these art and activism can instill, I think, a sense of pride and I think belonging
Yes.
for
Yeah.
marginalized background.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really, really great. I love that. And how does the book show Marsha's impact on New York City and the LGBTQIA plus community?
Yeah, so with One Day in June, you're kind of tracing the steps of where Marsha lived, right? And having snapshots of both her impact and her legacy, and then snapshots of today and how people are within that legacy, that spirit of generosity. So Marsha taking care of people, and then, in the 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and then today in the 2020s, like, oh, like being inspired by that similar desire to show up for the community. And it culminates at the rally in 2020 for Black Trans Lives at the Brooklyn Museum with Raquel Willis speaking. And so it's really, the through line of that book is like Marsha's legacy and spirit is present for all of that. And when we listen to it, we're inspired by the desire to take care of one another and to also be glamorous for ourselves. And that can impact another person to take more risks, in this world.
Yeah, it seems like you really want to depict the legacy of Marsha as it's woven into the fabric of the city itself, and
Yes.
because New York itself is a really enormous place, and you can
Yeah.
sort of get lost in the fabric of it. But
And Charlotte Christensen, the illustrator, just did such an incredible job with that vibe, like concretizing the vibe and through illustration. And it just is, to me, it's like I have so much joy talking about One Day in June.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, and why did you choose to focus specific on different on New York City neighborhoods, on different New York City neighborhoods in the book?
Yeah, to me, it was just like following the imprints of Marsha, right? Like the different places so it opens up at Reese Beach because in its current form, that's a haven for LGBTQIA queer trans people, right? But also Marsha was at Reese Beach with her lovers and her friends, twirling, in the waters. And so to me, it was really important to be like, this thing that we enjoy so much right now, like Marsha enjoyed it too. So yeah.
Yeah, these beautiful, what may seem like mundane moments are
Yes.
really just, spectacles. I mean,
Yes.
they're more than just mundane.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's really, really kind of a beautiful way to kind of create a really strong narrative about someone that's so special. And I think
Yeah.
that needs to be kind of like more sort of talked about a little bit more. But I want to know more. Why did you end the story with a 2020 moment, and what does it mean for the fight for trans rights?
Yeah. So the book is about one day in June, and it's specifically one day in June of 2020. So it starts at the beach and it starts kind of at the periphery of the rally, but it culminates and it's getting closer and closer. Everyone's like rendezvousing at the rally until you hear Raquel Willis, opening up a portal. This was a real thing that happened in 2020 when 15,000 people gathered in Brooklyn chanting, I believe, and Black trans power. And I thought, I was living right down the street and I just experienced it. It was like a portal, it was a paradigm shift. And so I loved the idea, kind of like in my filmmaking way of creating an art of like, you know, like, um, different places, similar vibe, all coalescing in one place to feel the full aliveness of each other.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Also, to kind of, I guess my last question is, how do you hope the book encourages readers to embrace Marsha's spirit of love and activism today?
Yeah, I think Marsha's spirit was just so generous, right? Like, how do we be tuned to that spirit of generosity? One of the, things Marsha organized around was like mutual aid and care, right? So whether it's a bail fund or whether it's, a GoFundMe for healthcare, whether it's showing up for people who aren't necessarily in our community. That's why I talk about like, Marsha was showing up for the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party and for free childcare, and those weren't necessarily her specific issues or social movement groups, but she knew that her sense of freedom was inextricably linked with others. So taking this moment to know that it's so important to show up and show out for others. And that doesn't mean turning the volume down on us. That doesn't mean like not being all of our glory. Marsha wasn't taking off her flower crown to do that work. Marsha was knowing that putting on that flower crown was essential to doing that work, right? And so I think I really want to encourage us all to feel how much joy we can get for showing up for other people, right? And that doesn't mean, like dimming our light, but it can actually increase our light.
That's great. That's wonderful. I love that. Like showing up for yourself in solidarity, and that helps you
Yeah.
support other kind of individuals
Yes.
who it seems like through love, unity, and standing up for justice are powerful acts of resilience. I think
Yeah.
now more so than ever. And
That's right.
yeah, and just with everything going on in the world. But lastly, what do you have? Any my last question? Even though I said this
Yeah.
question, but I really want to know. Like, do you have what's coming up? What's upcoming for you? Like any future projects coming up?
Yeah.
Anything?
So, like right now, I'm kind of moving around with both Marsha, the biography, the adult book, or the older reader book, The Joy and Defiance, and One Day in June. So I'm really excited to like just go to children's bookstores and read One Day in June, or do readings at public libraries or community spaces, and just I'm right now I'm like on tour wanting to bring it to the people. So you can get both books wherever you find books at your local library. I also read the audiobook, so you can listen to it wherever you listen to your audiobooks. You can also buy the book through your local independent bookstore. So that's a way to connect with the work right now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tourmaline, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.